Okay, welcome everyone. It is 4:30, I believe. Almost. I'm just waiting. There we go, 4:30 on my computer time. And I will call the meeting to order. And before we begin, I would just like to say that I'm not feeling very well today. And I'm going to pass the chairing of the meeting over to Councillor McMaster. It's not COVID related, but so everyone can dispel with those rumors, but I thought that I not share the meeting. So over to you, Councillor McMaster.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting operates within the territory of the Ucluelet First Nation, and notice that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Moving on to item 2, the adoption of the agenda.
Move adoption.
I believe we want to move item 8.1 to the start before item 8.5 before 8.1. So I will make that motion.
Seconded.
Okay, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended? Moving 8.5 to 8.1.
Move adoption as amended.
Yeah. All those in favour? None opposed? Motion carried. Okay, item 3, adoption of the minutes. 3.1, minutes of the regular council meeting held December the 8th, 2020.
Move adoption.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favour? None opposed? Motion carried. Item 3.2, minutes of the special council meeting held December 16th, 2020.
Move adoption.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favour? None opposed? Motion carried. Is there any public comment on agenda items, Elise?
Through the Mayor, we do not have any public comment.
Okay, moving on to item 5, the Mayor's report. I have nothing to report. And now I believe we have a delegation from Laurie Filgiano, Executive Director, and Laurie Gehrke, President of the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce regarding support for Common Ground Market. Are they here, Elise?
Through the Mayor, I'm just going to promote 2 panelists.
Hi, Laurie.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. I was going to be joined with Sandy Rance, actually Vice Chair, but I don't see her on here right now. So for the sake of time, I will jump right into the presentation if that's okay with everyone.
That's fine.
I'm going to share my screen with everyone. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Laurie Filgiano. I stepped into this position in October of 2020, taking over from Lara Kemps, and it's a pleasure to meet you all.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, I will share my screen. Okay, so Thank you so much for allocating time during this council meeting for this presentation. I very much appreciate it. I'm here to talk to you about Common Ground Market. Some of you may have already heard of this initiative. I've spoken about it on the radio over the past month, and it was in the Westerly newspaper shortly before the holidays. Common Ground Market is a multi-vendor online marketplace similar to Etsy, but specific to the 9 coastal communities of the Alberni-Clayoquot region. Let's jump right into the presentation. Okay. A bit about Common Ground Market. The Common Ground Market is a regional initiative with a mission to support the emerging and established artisans of the coast by helping make their work readily available across Canada. We were originally born as a new normal solution to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we quickly realized that there's actually a large demand for the accessibility of the crafts and locally made goods here on the coast. So in the following pages, we're going to look at an infographic on the various demographics that can benefit from this, from Common Ground Market. And these include, but aren't limited to, the list that you see here. So First Nation communities, youth makers, Ucluelet and Tofino weekend market vendors, PRAS members, makers who sell their goods on social media, which there's a lot of. And in essence, any person living in the 9 West Coast communities of the ACRD who would like to utilize this service and sell their craft online. So I'm going to jump into this infographic. All right, so First Nations and artisans, First Nation artisans, we're working closely with the employment and training program sector of the Chalmette Tribal Council to support local First Nation artisans to gain access to the site and set them up for success in selling their products to a wider market. We intend on setting up workshops where we'll go into the communities and help people set themselves up. Tofino and Ucluelet weekend market. So the Ucluelet market has about 25 vendors during the summer months, and the holiday market sells out every year at 38 vendors. The Tofino market has 50 vendors in a normal year, and their holiday market has been as large as 55 vendors in the past. As these venues require you to be there in person, we anticipate a virtual market will attract an even larger vendor base. Young makers under 19, this is one of my favorite areas. Many of the youth in our communities, they take advantage of the holiday market. They are vendors there, and it's a great way for them to sell their crafts. And with the permission and supervision from their parents, of course, Common Ground Market can be a venue for the young makers of the coast to test out a small business model and sell their crafts year round. So we're going to be offering youth vendors a reduced membership rate of $10, similar to how the Tofino Public Market offers their youth vendors that. Home-based and handmade West Coast. This is a Facebook group that was created by Lynette Dawson, who's an avid art advocate and artist based in Ucluelet. This group was created in November of 2020 to help local craftspeople sell their work. There's 311 members and tons of activity. We created a poll on that page in early December to gauge how many craftspeople would be interested in joining. And within a day, 31 vendors said that they would definitely join, with many more comments of support. So it was really awesome to see how that the artistic community was on board. We've been working and speaking closely with the Pacific Rim Art Society, and we intend on partnering with them in phase 2 of Common Ground Market to set up art and business workshops online. And there's a quote there from the executive director, Sue Payne, on their support. So e-commerce can be a really daunting endeavor for some people, and it comes with some risk and it comes with upfront costs. Without having an easily targeted audience, it's hard for artisans to commit to any of these startup costs. Common Ground Market is a marketplace that artisans can join risk-free, cost-effectively, and utilizing the large consumer base that Tourism Ucluelet and Tourism Tofino have access to via social media. Let's jump into what phase 1 is going to look like. So we intend on launching this market in spring of 2021, pending funding. We're going to begin with a soft launch of 10 vendors this coming February and move into a larger launch once we've ironed out the process. It will begin as strictly an e-commerce platform with upwards of 50 vendors. There's no cap on how many vendors can join from the 9 West Coast communities of the ACRD. Ucluelet Tourism and Tofino Tourism intend on supporting us with national promotion. Tourism Tofino supports the members of the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce, and that would be how they would be supporting us as well. Jumping into phase 2 of this project. So how do we see this market expanding? By fall 2021, we intend on expanding the services to include art workshops in partnership with Praz and Nest, art and business workshops in partnership with the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce and the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. There's going to be on-site advertising opportunities and pop-up shop opportunities for the vendors. So parts of phase 2 is also going to help with our market revenue. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so it's important that this market is self-sustaining. While I really wanted this to be a free market when I came up with the idea, administrative costs made it clear that just wasn't possible. That being said, I have done everything in my power to try to keep participation costs as low as possible. This won't be making money for the chambers at the get-go, at least. The idea is that it will increase chamber membership, however, and that's something that we're hoping to tap into. So our market revenue is based on a commission, meaning there's no overhead cost to the vendors for using the platform, and they only have to pay for the service once they sell something. We plan on charging a 10% commission rate for members of either chamber. You don't have to be members of both, and a 30% commission rate for non-members. Again, increasing artisan membership. Artisan memberships is quite affordable. It's $75 for an artisan membership. And it comes with the many other benefits and supports that the chamber offers. Sorry, I lost my place for a second. Other ways that we're going to increase revenue will be through advertising and featured vendor locations on the site, again, which will be available in phase 2. We'll also be charging for workshops that'll be offered. Artisans will also have the opportunity to offer these workshops and facilitate these workshops themselves. There'll also be some pop-up shop opportunities. So between exhibition times with Praz, we were hoping to utilize their space to offer some pop-up shops so vendors can test out a bricks and mortar location. Okay, so now we're going to be jumping into our budget. The next 2 pages include our budget breakdown. I'm not going to walk you through the details of it. This PDF will be sent to you alongside our letters of support. But feel free to have a look at it, and I'm happy to speak to any of the points on this budget. So what are we requesting from council? I'm here to request 2 things. One, we're requesting a letter of support for future granting purposes and financial support for the launch and year 1 of the market. We're requesting an $8,000 support from both the District of Tofino as well as the District of Ucluelet. And we're requesting a $5,000 grant and aid from the ACRD. It's a bit lower from the ACRD because of population base. I wanted to recognize that the District of Tofino has been a great supporter of the Tofino public market. I hope that you see Common Ground Market as an opportunity for the district to continue supporting the artisan community of our region. In conclusion, the coast seems to inspire people to create. So many of us depend on the craftsperson within us in some capacity or another. It can be somebody's livelihood, it can be a side hustle, it can often be a mental health support. For me, it's a common ground for friendships, without a doubt, or it's a hobby that gets us through these long, rainy winters. But for whatever reason, a lot of us are makers, and everyone wants us to continue making things. And I thank you so much for taking the time to consider my proposal.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from council? Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie. I like your idea. I'm just wondering sort of what the governance structure of the organization is. The reason I'm asking is that in all of the council grants that we give out, we have a fairly rigorous application sort of process, and including, you know, council needs to know that you're a nonprofit, or what sort of society you might have formed to move this ahead. Things like that. So if we're considering, you know, another sort of council grant of some sort, I think all those people that apply through our normal system of granting would feel sort of a little bit put out if we sort of grant without any of those criteria being met. So could you tell me a little bit more about that? I understand that you're new and maybe you haven't got that far with setting it up, but anything you could say to speak to that would be great.
No, it's a really good question. So currently this is a Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce initiative, and it is the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors who is leading this project. I do think that it would be something to consider in the upcoming year to create its own society, depending on the expansion of it. But for the moment, it's governed by the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. Councillor Anderson brought up the one point that I was going to ask, but in follow up to that, have you pursued any other forms of granting opportunities at this point, or has it been strictly through the ACRD, Tofino, and Ucluelet?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we have already received a grant from the credit union. We received a $9,230 grant that has been put towards web development. I have also been working with PRAS, and we've applied for the pivot funding grant, which will help us hire another person that will help me manage at a part-time capacity this website. I'm constantly on the lookout for other grants as well at this point.
Yeah, thank you. And just to follow up, one of the concerns often is on the long-term financial viability of an initiative such as yours, and that a one-time, one-year grant may, you know, the hope would be that it would be self-sustaining, and that and so that's often one of the areas that we look at in those considerations of grants. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I will say, when you receive the PDF, my budget does have it broken down on how much commission we anticipate receiving from the market, from the sales, and that amount will actually cover the running of the market.
I'll just follow up on Councillor Steer's question. Have you applied to ICE-T? Would this qualify under ICE-T?
Yeah, I spoke with Denise and Lynn with their new grant that's about to come out. I do believe that we will be eligible, and she has high hopes for us. We weren't eligible for any other funding until then. To be completely honest, the main reason being the project was underway before we applied for an ICE-T grant, and I wasn't aware that I had to apply for it before the project began. So unfortunately, I missed out on that one opportunity with ICE-T, but Lynn and Denise have been working closely with me to ensure that I'm up to date on any other funding that becomes available to us.
And my follow-up question is, maybe April can help out. She's on the line. Is there any way RMI could get applied to this?
Oh boy, so I looked into that as well. April, if you would like to, if you'd like to jump in, I'd love to. So the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce has $20,000 in RMI funds allocated towards the marathon. This year, the marathon didn't happen, so I requested if we could have those funds shifted over. RMI looked closely at it, and they went back and forth for a while, and we thought they were going to be able to, but in the end, because of the marketing aspect of it and because of the e-commerce aspect of it, they weren't able to support it.
Through the chair, that was going to be my response as well, is that it's more of a marketing initiative that's more appropriate for perhaps MRDT funds than for Resort Municipality Initiative funding.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chalmers.
My question will be for staff as well. Would this be something that might be able to fall under any of the stimulus grants that are coming through for COVID? You know, is that, I'm looking at you, Bob. Mr. McPherson, sorry. I don't know.
Thank you. I can't tell where anybody's looking. There's nothing I'm aware of that would be applicable in this circumstance. Yeah, interesting question, and something we can maybe do a little bit more research on, but there's nothing that I'm aware of.
Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, just one last question, I guess. I kind of would like to hear from our Chamber of Commerce and know that the support is there from the business sector as well. So I'm wondering if you could sort of let me know what kind of support you're getting from the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce, and have you looked for support from the Tofino Chamber of Commerce? Also, is the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce providing any funding, or is it just sort of help in kind, sort of?
Yeah. Jen Dart was going to try to be on this call, but she said she might not be able to make it. That being said, I do have a letter of support from Jen, and Jen and I have been working very closely on this initiative. So that's been great. In terms of our membership base, we have had a lot of support. That being said, the artisan membership base is definitely an area that we can tap into. It's not as heavily used as the other areas, and that's a large reason why this market would be really beneficial to both chambers. It can increase our memberships quite significantly. And in terms of spending, in terms of whether we're actually putting money in from the chamber side, that is in kind. This is taking a tremendous amount of my time, and so I think that the way we're seeing it is that we're allocating approximately 50% of my time towards this market in order to see it become a reality.
Thank you.
Through the chair, this is Elise Gocher-Bergman speaking. I just noticed that Jen Dart is on the meeting. If you'd like to invite her to speak, I can certainly unmute her if that would help.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the time you're taking in considering this. We provided a letter of support to the Ucluelet Chamber for this initiative, seeing it as a potential economic development strategy. Sorry, my dog might bark in the background. I wasn't planning on speaking. Basically, it's a pivot point we see it as a pivot point in a natural evolution out of COVID-19. And our letter states that because we have, as you know, we have an economic development contract, some business retention and expansion contract with the District of Tofino. So we do look in this area all the time, even though our services per se are more geared towards our members, but this is an initiative we would support. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors.
Thanks, Jen. I could just add a few words. I get the feeling that most of the people are interested in this. It's just the cost. So I'll address this to Bob at first. And could we refer this to staff to see if there's any way we could fund this to some extent and report back to council?
Certainly, a referral to staff is just fine. There are a couple of questions that I think we maybe want to answer. One, we just want to make sure that this is not an unlawful assistance to business for a municipality. And then the second thing is that we're wondering as staff is, does this best belong in the council grant process rather than as a one-off? And Councillor Anderson spoke to the notion of equity in terms of applying for money from the municipality. So Perhaps we can have a look at the material that we have so far. And I think that our presenter indicated that there was more material to come. I think once we have that, we can have a look through it, get some advice on the assistance to business question and how best to address that, and then have some advice for council.
Thanks, Bob. So can I get a motion to refer this to staff?
I'll move that the initiative be referred to staff.
I'll second the motion.
All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you all so much. Take care.
Through the chair, if I may, there was a second request
Yeah.
made for a letter of support. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that wasn't missed in council's discussion.
Okay. I have no problem with a letter of support because that doesn't cost us anything. But, would someone like to make a motion for a letter of support?
I'll move that we
Moved.
provide a letter of support.
Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Chalmers. All those in favour? None opposed?
Sorry, I have a question.
Oh.
I was raising my hand for a question. I just was wondering exactly what we're writing a letter of support for and who we're addressing it to.
I can send you the letter of support that we received from the District of Ucluelet as a reference. It's more of a general letter of support that can be used for future granting purposes. So it wouldn't have to be addressed to anybody in particular. It's more
Okay.
so that I have it handy so I wouldn't have to keep coming back and requesting.
Right, I'm comfortable seconding that then.
I'll call the vote again. All those in favour? Motion carried, none opposed. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Okay, moving on to correspondence, we have 7 items of correspondence. Are there any items that council would like to discuss further? Councillor Chalmers.
Yes, I'd like to discuss the letter from Minister Osborne. And in that I would like to see us inviting her for a meeting. And I think that it'd be ideal to do it before Parliament goes back into session, as I'd like to talk about the wastewater treatment plant and a few other things. So even though there's only 4 of us, I think it would be prudent to invite her.
Councillor Steer.
Yeah, definitely support that. And also, if I wouldn't mind bringing to the table 7.5 in the correspondence, the Coastal Agricultural Roundtable request for a representative.
Okay, let's go in order then and deal with item 7.4, correspondence from MLA J. Osborne regarding constituency and ministerial contact information. And I'll pass that over to Councillor Chalmers. You're muted.
Sorry, I was in. I guess I already said what I would like. I'd like to see what council would say about inviting Minister Osborne for a meeting.
I think I've seen a lot of thumbs up, so I think if you'd like to make a motion, I think you'll get the support.
Okay, I will move to direct staff to invite the minister at her convenience. Do you need anything else from me?
To address council.
To address council?
Do I have a seconder for that motion?
Sorry, it looks like Ms. McPherson had a question.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not trying to vote. It would be helpful if for us corresponding with Minister Osborne's office, that if we could have a list of items that we would like to discuss with her, so that they can prepare the minister for our discussion with us.
Yeah, I think
And
liquid waste management was mentioned.
And yeah, so if that's what we want to talk about is a wastewater treatment plant, and that's it. But we do have to be specific in our request.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll ask council then if they have, aside from liquid waste management, are there any other items we wish to discuss with our MLA?
Can we add to this if we make the motion, Bob, or will it have to be in the council meeting? I feel like maybe
It does not need to be in the council meeting, although, you know, I think in fairness to, you know, for the purpose of corresponding, but I think perhaps in light of sort of fairness to the rest of council, I think all of council should be on the same page about what we want to talk with our MLA/Minister of Municipal Affairs about.
Okay. I think maybe we could expand that into funding for more rural towns and the costs of infrastructures and budgeting items.
So could we succinctly around maybe alternative forms of revenues for municipalities, something of that nature?
Is good enough for you, Bob?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Is there a seconder for this? Seconded by Councillor Steer. Any further discussion before I call the vote? All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried.
And sorry, just one more thing, and I know this all seems a little bit funny, given Minister Osborne's recent role in connection to the community. Are we looking for a meeting with her as our MLA or as the Minister of Municipal Affairs? I mean, and it actually differs how we request the meeting.
Councillor Chalmers, you're muted again.
Sorry, I'm off today. Should raise my hands. Bob, do you know what the most appropriate would be in regards to which items we're on?
Either is fine. I would just suggest that we make the request as MLA. That can move a little bit faster than going through her ministerial office.
Okay. Well, I think we should make the request as an MLA then, unless there's any objections. Okay, that motion was carried. The next item was correspondence from ACRD requesting council representative on coastal agricultural roundtable. And this was brought up by Councillor Steer.
Yeah, I know that there has been a request for representation, and we have, I believe, Councillor Anderson, have you been participating in those roundtables at this point?
Yes, I have. They've been fairly infrequent, the meetings. The last meeting I wasn't able to attend due to the technical difficulties. But that was in December, and yeah, so they meet about 4 times a year, sometimes less. And yeah, of course.
Would you be willing to continue in that role?
Yes, I would.
And I will defer maybe to Elise if we need a motion to it is a request from the ACRD. Do we need a motion to appoint? Would the mayor be appointing that position, or is this something that we just need to make a motion to send good old Councillor Anderson as our representative?
Thank you, Councillor Steer. Through the chair, this would be a council appointment, not a mayoral appointment. So I would need a council motion from all of you to choose a representative from amongst yourselves.
Thank you. I'll make that motion if you're comfortable with that, Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I am.
I'll move that Councillor Anderson be our representative on the Coastal Agricultural Roundtable.
Seconder, Councillor Chalmers. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried.
Councillor McMaster?
Yes.
Can we backtrack to item 7.2? I would also like to address that one. There was a request of support from the City of Roslyn regarding universal no-cost contraception, and I would like for us to write a letter of support for that.
Would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Yes, I would like to move that staff write a letter of support for no cost, sorry, in support of universal no cost contraception to support the City of Rossland request.
And I will second that. Any further discussion? All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. Thank you, Councillor Chalmers. Moving on to presentations and reports. Item 8.1, 2021 to 25 draft financial plan feedback summary. Verbal report and presentation from financial services. And there's a hand from Mr. McPherson. You're muted, Bob.
At the start of the meeting, council did move item 8.5 ahead of 8.1.
True. Thank you for bringing it up. Moving down to 8.5. Ministerial Order No. M016-2021 report from Corporate Services. The recommendation is that the Chief Election Officer be authorised to implement all amendments to the by-election process and all actions to allow voting pursuant to Ministerial Order No. M016-2021 for the administration of the 2021 Tofino by-election. Can someone move the recommendation?
Since you've read it already, I won't read it again. I will move the recommendation.
Have a seconder. Councillor Steer. Any further discussion? Councillor Steer.
I just was going to ask if our corporate service manager wanted to speak at all, or if we can just we can ask this if she had any comments before moving forward with the vote.
No, through the chair, I have no comments, and thank you for letting me skip the line. I appreciate it.
Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation? None opposed? The recommendation is carried. Thank you for that reminder, Mr. McPherson. Moving back to item 8.1, which is a draft financial plan feedback, a verbal report and presentation from financial services. Hello, Laura.
Hello, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll just take a quick second here to share my screen. I have a presentation. Okay, does everybody see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And I just want to double check, it's just the slides without notes, right?
No, Laura, you can see the notes.
Okay, I'm going to stop this for a second. You get to just look at me while I'm awkwardly looking into my computer. Okay, let's try that.
That's it.
Excellent. Okay.
And your audio seems a little bit low, Laura.
Is it? Okay, let's see. That could just be my voice, but okay, how does that sound? Better? Okay, great. Okay, so the purpose of today's presentation is to summarize the feedback that we received regarding the draft 2021 to 2025 financial plan. So I'll just take a few moments to go over some general points about the survey and the communications, and then we'll look at each of the survey questions individually. So we did receive some feedback throughout this process that indicated that the questions in this specific survey weren't quite detailed enough. And I just wanted to highlight that this was the first of 2 consultation sessions throughout the financial planning process. And this first one is typically more broad in scope. So details regarding the second public consultation, which will be more detailed in nature as we develop more information about the projects, will be communicated throughout the remainder of the budget process. And this presentation is intended to provide a summary and highlight the key themes and opinions that we received. But I do want to just mention that 100% of the survey responses were provided to Mayor and Council as well as to staff for consideration moving forward. And throughout the presentation, I'll do my best to answer any questions that you may have, but the managers are present at the meeting here. So if there's something specific, I may defer to them to assist with providing more information for you. So a little bit of information about the survey. This was an online survey only, and it was available from mid-November following our special budget meeting and available through till January 4th when the municipal office reopened following the holiday closure. And it's made up of 10 questions as well as a general feedback section. And we were really happy to see that we received 161 responses to the survey. In terms of survey communications, we had email blasts that went out to our subscription list. We had multiple posts on our social media outlets, colored print ads in the Westerly News, as well as reminders in the council highlights post. And we did have a direct link to the survey on our website as well. So the first question that we asked was a general question about communications to make sure that we are communicating with the community to get the most feedback. So as you can see from the graph here, email subscription was the preferred communication tool, followed by information on our website, and then information through our social media channels, Facebook and Instagram. And in a lot of these questions, we did have an other category where you could leave open-ended comments. And one suggestion that we did receive was to include information in a newsletter to go out with the quarterly utility bills. So that's something we'll take into consideration. Our second question was open-ended and was regarding bylaw enforcement priorities. So you'll see this word cloud that came up. So the larger words are keywords that came up more often than the smaller words who are mentioned fewer times in all of the responses that we received. And some of the highlights or some of the highest priorities, so the most repeated words and phrases were parking, illegal and overnight camping, beach fires and beach patrol, fireworks, littering, and illegal vacation rentals. And these are all items of which staff are aware of and considering as part of the financial planning process, and that does include ensuring adequate staffing resources. The next set of questions were in regards to or in context of the proposed changes to the district's parking system to be included in the financial plan, which relates to creating a pay parking system at the beaches and in the village center. So the first question was, do you consider parking to be an important community issue? You can see here on the graph that most or a majority of the respondents indicated that yes, it is. However, that other category is quite high as well. So there were some comments such as parking being an important issue, but should be free or offered at a reduced rate for local residents. There was a suggestion to create a large parking lot and to keep vehicles out of the village center. To have improvements to beach parking lots and to keep RVs out of the village center. And these questions about parking were specifically ones that respondents felt were a little bit vague and general. And at this point in the financial planning process, we just didn't have enough information to provide more detailed level questioning. But as I mentioned, we will have a second consultation session, which will provide more detailed information, and there will be consultation throughout this specific program planning process as well. So we also wanted to get some information about what the best way to gather feedback about parking related projects would be. So we've offered a few suggestions here. The interactive online platform was a popular choice, as well as surveys. Town hall being a little bit less popular at the moment, perhaps due to COVID-19 restrictions. And then we did have some other comments as well. And that included combining all of the methods of communication, creating a broadly representative advisory committee, providing easy to interpret information that would be available at public locations, finding ways to include community members who may not have access to online methods, and then increasing the advertising and promotion of the consultation regardless of the method. And then the last question related to the parking programs was whether the respondents were interested in participating in public engagement. And as you can see here, overwhelming response said yes. A couple of the other questions mentioned that it would depend on what was involved, depending on the method of communication. The next couple of questions were in regards to our zero waste or proposed zero waste sustainability projects. So whether or not there was support for these types of projects in general. As you can see here, the majority of respondents said yes, they are interested in supporting the investment in these types of projects. And we followed up with the question of whether or not they supported the use of tax dollars for zero waste sustainability projects. And you can see that quite a few people did say yes, a few more said no. And in the other comments, there were a couple of different suggestions. So generally, the respondents were supportive, but it would be dependent on the costs of the projects. There were suggestions that businesses should be held accountable for their contribution to the waste. Suggestions that RMI, MRDT, or contributions from paid parking revenue could be used for tourism-related waste, and then a suggestion to look for grant-related opportunities. So next, we wanted to get some information or some feedback regarding the proposed redesign projects for the roads. So you can see here in the graph, Lynn Road and Chesterman Beach came in as a top priority, followed by Mackenzie Beach Road, and then a few other options. And we did get some other suggestions as well that aren't currently in the financial plan, and that would include Campbell Street from 2nd Street moving west, implementation of crosswalks at Uwood and also at Sandpiper Place. And then once again, we're seeing it come up, paving of the beach parking lots. So in light of the temporary synthetic ice rink that came in, we wanted to get a bit of feedback regarding ideas for other projects that might meet RMI funding criteria, recreation type projects. So another word cloud here with some of the larger words being the keys that came up quite often in the results. And those top responses included a public pool, outdoor education center, free beach yoga, visitor park and ride, and improved parking, outdoor live music and art exhibits, as well as upgrades to the Tonquin Trail. And we followed that up as well with a question related to supporting the use of tax dollars to fund similar type projects to the temporary synthetic ice rink. And you can see here in the graph that the majority of respondents were not in favor of using tax dollars for these types of projects. And in the other category, there were lots of suggestions to continue using RMI funding or MRDT funding for recreation projects rather than using taxation. So the last question that we asked was not really a question, it was more of a section for general feedback and comments. So again, lots and lots of really great feedback here. And I've just summarized a couple of the most mentioned thoughts. So a prioritization of the needs of locals over the needs of tourists, deferring or removing projects that raise taxes, promotion of alternative transportation, long-term affordable housing solutions, improved resources for mental health and addiction services, and postponing recreational projects until completion of the wastewater treatment plant. So that's the end of my report here. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer.
Well, I think I saw Councillor Steer's hand go up first. So, Councillor Steer.
Thank you, Laurie. I appreciate the summarization and also appreciate that the next survey, and you pointed out some of the concerns around the survey in terms of the lack of information, and that the second go around, as we'll all look forward to having more detailed information on some of those projects that had been talked to. I just had one just question on the 161 responses. I was just curious if those were individual responses, or if we have a way of tracking that, or if there were if say there was one individual that made multiple responses, or was this 161 individuals?
Thank you. There isn't really a way for me to tell through the survey platform whether they were multiple people responding or the same person responding multiple times. They come in as individual responses. There were some cases where similar answers came in where you were allowed to include a general field. So it is possible, but we don't have a way of tracking that.
Thank you. I was just wondering.
Anyone else? Councillor Anderson.
Hi, I'm pretty happy with the number of responses, and I hope that people aren't loading it, as might be suggested by Councillor Steer's question. I'm just wondering what some of the responses on the survey were sort of criticisms of the survey itself, and I'm just wondering what council could do to improve that. I'm sure staff will take note of those things and do their best to improve some of the issues that were raised. But what would staff need from council to make the next go round of the survey better?
I'm not sure if Councillor Chalmers wants to just chime in there before I answer.
Sure, I was just going to speak to, I think the staff was saying, Councillor Anderson, that the first one is vague because they're getting more information, and the second go around is planned to be a lot more detailed, which I think will alleviate a lot of those concerns.
Does that satisfy you, Councillor Anderson?
It does. I'm just wondering if council needs to provide any of that detail. I suppose that will come out of our next budget discussion. So, okay, I'm good enough with that, yeah, unless staff has something specific.
No, let's now put a hand down. So
I think it is really good to, through the budget meeting process, if there is specific information that council wants to get feedback from the community, to just let us know so we can include those types of questions in either the survey or whatever type of feedback sort of format that we go with for the next round.
Laura, I sent in my email to you, I said I'd be interested to know what projects could be deferred and what projects had to be done. And I'm sure the rest of the community would like to know the same sort of things.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the managers also have received all of the feedback. So I think that a lot of that information will come up through our budget meetings later this month.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Laura? Any more comments from staff? I think we can just move on. Thanks, Laura. That was a great presentation.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Moving on to item 8.2, a zoning amendment application from CERMAC, 61 4th Street. We have a report from Community Sustainability. Hello, Peter.
Good afternoon, Council. I'll be sharing my screen here. I have a brief report. Okay, so hopefully we're all looking at a presentation regarding the zoning amendment for CERMAC down at 61 4th Street. During this presentation, or the report to Council is related to consideration of first reading of a zoning amendment bylaw for the property. A little bit of background, the application was originally received March 20th, 2018. Since that time, we kind of had brought it forward for permission to proceed, and then had a information update, and then brought it back for permission to proceed again. So it's kind of been a slowly ongoing process, but I think that the applicants and staff have kind of arrived at the final application package. So we're moving forward into the bylaw stage at this point. Permission to proceed related to this version of the application was granted on June 23rd of 2020. So the location is the large CERMAC property, kind of between Main Street and 4th Street there, adjacent to the 4th Street dock. It was previously two separate parcels, but it has recently been consolidated into one parcel known as 61 4th Street. The proposal would be a zoning amendment that would facilitate up to 2 new buildings on the subject property. And within those 2 buildings, there'd be up to 12 dwelling units. These dwelling units would serve as staff accommodation for CERMAC. There's also the potential for ground floor commercial uses that has also been added into the proposed bylaw at the request of the applicant. It's important to note that these ground floor commercial uses are not required by the bylaw, but they're an option that the applicant could exercise if they choose to. The existing dwelling on the property will be removed, and the zoning boundaries, currently the property is split zoned, and the zoning boundaries will be adjusted to accommodate the development as well. So this is a kind of the architect's rendering of the proposed development, how it may look. Essentially, there'd be 2 fairly large buildings on the property. The actual entrance to the CERMAC, there's a reasonably steep driveway adjacent to Anchor Park. That may be moved slightly to accommodate the buildings, but that would probably depend a little bit on any geotechnical aspects that would be kind of brought forward at the actual building permit stage. But this is a basic rendering that would kind of show roughly what the proposal would entail when it's finally built out. Again, here's some floor plans or sort of a site plan. The larger structure on the left would be the one that is intended to be built first. My understanding is that would have 8 dwelling units between 1 and 2 bedroom units, and then the smaller property or the smaller building to the right would have 4 units for a total of 12 units eventually at full build out. So taking a quick look at some of the overarching policies that we use to evaluate land use decisions here in Tofino, looking at the vision to action plan. Some kind of broad statements regarding buildings, combining Tofino's eclectic character and West Coast design, appropriate scale, fit in with the coastal nature, and also talks a little bit about viewscapes, which is certainly something that has been mentioned previously with regards to this application and something that staff have been keeping an eye on. Diversity of housing forms that are available throughout the community, as well as kind of supporting a unique and strong local economy that has a variety of components to it. The official community plan designates the property within the village designation. So this is all kind of within the downtown core area of the village designation. Mixed use infill development is promoted. There's no specific density regulations or targets for this area. This would be an area where we would certainly promote higher density residential development. The waterfront area is kind of noted that it should be maintained as a working harbor with viewscapes protected, as well as providing regular access to the public to the waterfront. Staff housing has broad support throughout the OCP. The one thing that I did want to note is that there is a policy within the OCP that notes that standalone residential use is not supported in this particular area. So that's one thing that kind of I was sort of thinking about with regards to this particular application, as we'd be kind of considering standalone residential units here in this application. However, the overall property is actually a mix of commercial and industrial as well as residential uses. So in this particular case, it doesn't feel like that kind of policy or goal of the OCP is in conflict with the application in any way. The downtown vitalization plan kind of has a variety of design considerations. Most of these considerations have been consolidated into the various development permit areas in the downtown area. So a couple of the main design considerations include north-south building orientation, building widths limited to 120 feet, maximum building heights of 2 to 2.5 stories. The idea with these sorts of design considerations was to avoid separating Main Street from the waterfront, ensuring that there's connection between the waterfront and the pedestrian and other properties along Main Street. So that those properties that are front on the water don't essentially cut off the rest of the town from the water. There was some initial concerns with the height. The initial design, to my eyes at least, looked like we were considering a 3-story structure. However, I had some more conversations with our building inspector as well as with the applicant, and we kind of decided to drill down a little bit into what the downtown vitalization plan was really looking to do, as well as the development permit area. And the idea with the 2.5 stories, there is no definition for a half story, but that was to encourage gable roofs as opposed to shed roofs or flat roofs within that area. And this particular design is proposing a gabled roof. So based on that particular design, it could be considered as a 2.5 story structure. The affordable housing needs assessment talks about permanent year-round accommodation, major category of need. Somewhere in the $700 to $1,600 month price range, depending on how big the unit is. Staff are anticipating a housing agreement for the units to ensure they remain as housing and potentially remain in the actual target range for price. The proposal is generally in line with affordable housing needs assessment goals. However, it is worth noting that this is a private development on private land, and the housing agreement will likely reflect that. Typically with housing agreements for staff accommodation on private land, we do not restrict price. We focus more on indicating that the residents must be employed by the business and that the units themselves must be used as housing. However, this may be a discussion that council wishes to have as we move forward. Ideally, should we be granted first reading today, we'll likely be talking about this a little bit more with the applicant between first and second readings, and having kind of a basic understanding of what the housing agreement will look like to bring back for council's consideration by second reading. The zoning property is currently split zone between R2, which is a 2-family residential zone, so duplexes are permitted there, and W2, which is industrial waterfront. The proposal would essentially involve rezoning the R2 portion and a portion of the industrial waterfront as well, sort of the whole upper area of the property that's adjacent to Main Street, and replacing that with a new comprehensive development zone that would allow the build out of the proposed development. So we're looking at an increase in density, changes to the form and character, changes to the use in some areas, setbacks, as well as the potential for commercial uses at ground level, as I mentioned. So here's a map that kind of shows the current zoning of the property. There's this R2 section in and amongst the W2 section. The proposed zoning, this is a sketch that's been provided by the applicant that shows the CD zone sort of towards the bottom of the image there. That would essentially cover the whole upper area. There's quite a steep slope on the property that leads down towards the industrial part of the property where Cermac's operation takes place, or part of Cermac's operation takes place. So a few of the planning considerations that staff have identified. The design, as has been noted, initially there was some concerns about height. However, upon further reflection and discussion, it does appear that the proposed design meets the general requirements of the vitalization plan and the DPA goals and policies. Parking is something that's come up. The proposal does meet the minimum requirements as outlined in the zoning bylaw. However, design we'd like to make sure that any parking is integrated well with the proposed building, as well as with the recent upgrades to Main Street as well. Geotechnical considerations, there are some very steep slopes on the property. Typically, these are addressed at building permit. However, at council's discretion, a geotechnical study could be requested through the rezoning process. Everything, staff along with most of our rezonings, are recommending a servicing brief. There's going to be a significant increase in density for residential units for this property should the rezoning and development eventually go through. So to understand those impacts to district infrastructure will be important. Typically, servicing briefs are received between first and second reading, so that'll be something that will go back to the applicants should they be granted first reading and request a servicing brief at that point. The multimodal transportation plan. In general, the proposed rezoning finds some support in the MMTP. It's in we're putting some density in the downtown area where access to facilities and amenities is there without necessarily the need to get into a car and drive. So it's very conceivable that somebody living in one of these units or somebody coming to stay in one of these units while they work for Cermac may not need to drive very much while they are staying there. Community amenity contribution, this hasn't been discussed very much with the applicant. However, the community amenity contribution guidelines note that any developments with a housing agreement should be exempt from CAC guidelines. So the housing agreement may effectively be the community amenity contribution in this case. However, that's something that staff will continue to discuss with the applicant. And then commercial uses, I just wanted to note again that this is an option and not a requirement. So some of our other zones note that commercial uses are permitted on the ground floor and housing is permitted above the ground floor only. And so we are kind of designing the zone so that it forces the structure to become what we can consider a classic mixed use building. In this case, the applicant has requested commercial uses as an option, but is primarily interested in creating staff accommodation on this location. So taking a quick look at flooding and tsunami risks, the lower part of the property may be inundated in the event of a tsunami and over the next several decades may have some flooding risks associated with it. However, that very steep portion of the property will essentially negate any of the initial risk of a tsunami. However, further geotechnical studies may shed greater light on that, and that's something that will become more and more important at the building permit stage of this development. So looking at a few of the options we have today, we could grant first reading to the proposed bylaw, grant first reading with amendments should any amendments be seen as necessary, deny the application, defer or otherwise deal with the application. Staff are recommending that first reading be granted to the bylaw. There's next steps, we'd be looking at referrals, gathering any other information is needed from the applicant. Primarily that'd be the servicing brief, and then bringing it back for council's consideration of second reading, moving forward from there. So if there are any questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to try and answer.
Any questions for Peter? Councillor Steer.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it, and I'm very supportive of moving this to first reading. I had you've answered most of the questions in the report around height and the questions. And what I did have a question around two questions. One was around in the design review. This will go to design review, and is it my understanding that a Main Street development permit are there further reviewed, and then that permit is actually issued by council?
Yeah, that is correct. So I know previously we've had discussions about potential covenants to secure designs that are proposed at rezoning. In this case, again, zoning, it's hard to really get into specific designs, but this particular area is within the Main Street development permit area. So that is a permit area that is, those development permits are issued by council. However, before we bring it to council, we'll bring it to the design review panel. They'll provide comments, staff will prepare a report, and then bring the comments and any other considerations before council to issue the development permit. So this is not the only time council will see this application.
And then I had one other question, if I may. It was around the geotechnical report, and I was curious as to, in your report, it talked about the geotechnical report and associated covenant may be required. And I was curious as to what criteria do we generally use when we issue that, and who determines that geotechnical report? And I think I heard you briefly mention that it is council that may request that. Is that typically what the order of business in this case?
No, that's not typically the order of business. We have, as the District of Tofino, we have kind of a development approval information areas. I'm not sure if it's a bylaw, but it's an aspect of the OCP where with almost any development application that we get, we can request various pieces of information from the applicant. So if they say they don't want to give us, a geotechnical report, we actually have the legal right to request that they do so. However, often in rezonings, it may be a concern, it may not be a concern, but at the building permit stage, our building inspector actually does have the authority for any building permit to request a geotechnical report. And at this stage, my understanding is that almost every single building permit now, unless it's for a small structure, but for any major structure, will have to have a geotechnical report, and particularly this one as it's being built essentially on the edge of a cliff.
Right, and that was my understanding as well around the geotechnical report. So I didn't know if council had to say, yes, we do want one, or if in fact that would be part of the process.
Yeah, so it will be part of the process, but at this point, usually we kind of leave the option open for council if there are some significant concerns from council at this point, just to say, okay, well, we'd like to know that, if we approve this land use, that it can actually be carried out. Those are the different components. Zoning is, yes, we give you permission to do this, but just because council and staff are supportive of something from an engineering perspective, it may not actually be feasible. So sometimes it's almost useful for the applicant to know that earlier on in the process. But it's sort of through a rezoning, it's one of those things that may be requested, but is not always requested. It's sort of at council's discretion, but it will come up at some point during this development process, certainly.
Thank you.
I have a question, Peter, relates to the housing agreement. It's really hypothetical and I doubt it will happen, but on the slim chance that some of the units were vacant for a period of time and they weren't taken up by CERMAC staff, is there an opportunity for these units to be rented out to the community at large?
Yes, I think through the housing agreement, what we would probably be looking to do primarily is secure the units as housing so they couldn't be converted to office space at a later date. And then further, kind of ask that anybody who resides in the units will either be employees of CERMAC or employees of another business in the District of Tofino with a valid business license. We could say that they have had to be working within the District of Tofino for a minimum of 3 months or kind of impose those types of restrictions. But the goal would be kind of, as you noted, to not have any of the units empty.
That's good. Thank you. Any further questions for Peter? Councillor Anderson.
I'm just wondering on the commercial option that was noted in your report a couple of times. This was brought up at the first go around, first look at this application, and commercial at first wasn't proposed for the building. So I'm glad to see that they've added it, because over time I think that may become more of a part of Main Street. How does that function? Would the zoning allow for both commercial and residential, and then residential could be converted at some time? Or I'm just wondering how that functions.
Yeah, you're correct. It could, for example, be built purely as a residential structure. And then at a later date, should it be deemed necessary by the property owners, those could be converted into commercial units. It would be worth kind of taking that in consideration through the housing agreement as well. Typically, a housing agreement will secure unit. One of the goals of our housing agreements is to secure units in perpetuity as residential units, so that they can't be converted maybe into something that we don't want. That's probably not going to be an issue in this case, but it's a kind of a standard clause that we include in most of our housing agreements at this point. However, through further discussion with the applicants, there may be an opportunity in the housing agreement to kind of have an option for the units on the lower floor to eventually be converted into commercial units at a later date, should that be deemed necessary.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion?
Sure, I'll move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1303-2021 be introduced and read a first time.
I have a seconder, Councillor Steer. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. And Peter's going to hang around as we move to item 8.3, zoning amendment application, Tofino Resort and Marina, 634 Campbell Street. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you. I'll be sharing my screen again here. All right, so this presentation is related to the zoning amendment application for Tofino Resort and Marina. The location of the property is 64 Campbell Street, but what we're actually considering is the foreshore lease that's associated with the property. So brief background, the application was received in 2018. Permission to proceed was granted in May of 2020. First reading was granted August 25th, 2020. The service has been operational in the current location. The applicant had understood that this was permitted initially during the, I believe it was approximately 3 to 4 years ago, during the renovation of the property. They had actually expanded the foreshore lease, and the new foreshore lease had small sections of it that were outside of the previously existing zoning. And the applicants did not realize that at the time. And so we're essentially moving through this zoning amendment process to rectify that and match the zoning boundaries with the foreshore lease boundaries. So the location of the foreshore lease is on the left in red, and the location of the dock where the commercial floatplane service is operating out of is on the right-hand side, located within that small blue square. So the proposal, as noted, is a zoning amendment that will change a portion of the foreshore lease from Marine Community 1 to commercial waterfront, I believe is the description for W1. The W1 zoning boundary will now match up with the lease boundary should the application proceed. And the amendment would, it's been brought forward to permit the applicant to allow a commercial floatplane service to drop off and pick up in that particular area that was on the previous slide. So this proposal map here kind of shows a little bit more clearly the small square to the right-hand side is still within the Marine Community 1 zone and does not have the permission for a commercial floatplane operation or commercial floatplane to arrive and depart. However, that's where the applicants have ended up siting that dock. It is within their foreshore lease, but it's just outside of the boundaries of our particular zoning. So again, looking through some of the policy related to land use decisions, starting with the vision to action. Downtown Tofino is a vibrant place with a mixture of residential amenities, commercial uses, and a working waterfront and transportation infrastructure. Tofino is the transportation hub for Clackamas Sound, active participant in marine road and air access planning. So there's not a lot of statements within the vision to action, as this is a very specific zoning amendment, but there's general support from what we find. The area under consideration is, as part of the foreshore lease, it's actually not designated in the Tofino OCP. However, the overall land use vision and general principles of the OCP support the use as part of a working harbor. In general, there are also environmental considerations and smart growth. So things like mixed use properties are always supported with any development applications. Staff haven't found any policies or goals that would conflict or be in conflict with this application. And in general, there's support in the OCP. So most of the lease is currently zoned waterfront commercial, but the floatplane dock is located in an area that's zoned marine community. There's also a very small other kind of sliver of the foreshore lease that is still in that MC1 zone as well. So this zoning amendment would also change that from MC1 to W1. And this is all the result of the redevelopment of the property. There was an expansion of the foreshore lease through the province a couple of years ago. And the floatplane dock was constructed just outside of the W1 zone. And so we've been left with this issue where they're running a service that is not permitted within the zone. So this zoning amendment will align the zoning boundary, the W1 zoning boundary, to the current lease boundary. A few of the land use considerations that staff have been thinking about through this process. The use of the area, the sort of commercial floatplane service has been coming into that dock for many years. The new location actually does increase safety a little bit, as has been outlined in the report. It may provide a little bit of a better, more regular service as well. Parking in this case is likely not a major concern. This service is geared primarily towards visitors to our area. However, it is likely that various locals will be using it. That being the case, most of the people that will be using the service will not be having cars. And the few that do live in town that will be using the service, there's typically adequate parking on the property to accommodate them. Environmental considerations, there are protocols in place at the dock to ensure kind of general environmental considerations are followed, particularly related to spills on the water and other aspects of running a marine wharf. There was some discussion during, I believe, first reading of this application about the effects of wildlife, particularly with planes flying over Browning Passage, landing in Browning Passage, flying over the shorebird sanctuary that extends up the Tofino Inlet. We referred this application to WildSafe BC as well as the Raincoast Education Society. We didn't receive any response from them. My understanding is that the effects of a couple additional planes flying over that area daily is quite hard to quantify. So it's a little bit difficult to comment on, though I know this was something that was brought up during first reading. So I don't have a specific answer to the questions that were raised at that point. However, it is worth noting that there are currently several other floatplane operations that move through that area, as well as the Tofino Airport is located, kind of approximately in from Sappy Narrows, just across from Long Beach. So it's also located within that area. Flooding and tsunami, no major concerns here, as we're not talking about habitable developments. And there are areas on the property towards the area that's adjacent to Campbell Street that are actually outside of the flooding and tsunami zones. The multimodal transportation plan, it may provide an option for people to visit Tofino without bringing a car. So there's some kind of small support within the multimodal transportation plan, as people coming in on a plane can potentially stay either at the Tofino Resort and Marina or a nearby area, and may not need a car to get around to the various restaurants and amenities of downtown Tofino. Community amended contribution, the applicant has offered a CAC of $2,400. This is outside of the typical framework that we use for evaluating CACs. However, this particular zoning amendment is a little bit difficult to evaluate using our typical framework. It is worth noting that this amount does match the cost that the district recently output related to the indoor rec facility. So it does match the goal of the CAC in going towards the indoor recreation facility. The other thing that staff are recommending as part of this report is a waiver of the public hearing. So typically a public hearing is held after second reading of a zoning bylaw. Staff are recommending waiving this requirement in line with the Local Government Act conditions. There's two of them that need to be satisfied. Those are outlined in the staff report. The primary rationale is that the use is already occurring. There's no material change really happening to the property, and the zoning amendment will match the zoning boundary with the foreshore lease and the existing infrastructure. Currently, we've received, to my knowledge, no real complaints regarding the service, and it's more of a process that we're going through to make sure that we have fully legally fulfilled all obligations in order to ensure that the service can continue running in future. So that's the primary rationale. There's also always the concern related to COVID-19 and public gatherings and the challenges presented by online public hearings. I believe that the province has released recently some guidelines related to public hearings occurring during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is obviously an option, and the public hearing waiver will be at council's discretion, but primarily staff have identified that as the use is already occurring, this may not be a well-attended public hearing and may not be necessary in this particular case. So some of the options that we're looking at today would be to grant second reading to the zoning amendment bylaw, grant second reading with amendments, reject, refuse the application, defer, otherwise deal with the application. Staff are recommending the first option, and staff are also recommending that the public hearing requirement be waived. So next steps could be the public hearing, or if it's waived, we would publish a notice of the waiver of public hearing. That notice would still ask for public input. However, there would be no formal public meeting. That would happen at one moment where council could all together review public input on the application. And then we'd be looking to do third and potentially fourth readings. Usually between third and fourth reading, we're looking to finalize any legal agreements or outstanding community amenity contributions, those kinds of things. If all of that has come in this case, there are no outstanding legal agreements. It makes sense to move the application forward fairly quickly, and we could do third and fourth readings consecutively, or sorry, concurrently. So if there are any questions or comments, I would be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions for Peter? Seeing none, would someone like to make a recommendation?
Sure. I will move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1293/2020 be read a second time, and that staff be authorized to waive a public hearing for District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1293/2020 and publish notices advising the public of the waiver.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Item 8.4, Municipal Alcohol Policy. The events report from Corporate Services. I suspect this is Elise.
Yes, it is. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen, just a moment. All right, I think everyone can see this now. So this policy is coming back to council for review and possible adoption, as well as a few consequential amendments that are being made as a result of the policy. So I'll just take us through a bit of background. This is a short presentation, as this didn't come to council that long ago. It came forward at a committee of the whole meeting in November, but just to refresh your memory, this was a council resolution back in at the end of 2019, directing staff to focus on municipal alcohol policy on public health and safety considerations for events on municipal property. Consultation then took place throughout 2020 with numerous public health and event producer representatives, as well as a public survey. And we got a lot of great responses that informed the content of the policy and how we'll be rolling it out from here. And then that draft was circulated to Committee of the Whole, as I mentioned, in November of 2020. And we received some great feedback from the committee at that time and presented the feedback that we received, pardon me, as well as the draft policy goals and policy statements at that time. So I'll just review sort of the highlights of the committee's feedback that we received and have incorporated into the policy that's in your package tonight as Appendix 1 to the report. So we did include definitions of public and private events for clarity, though those do come from the Liquor Control and Licensing branch, Liquor and Cannabis Licensing branch now it is. And we don't control those definitions, but they are in there for clarity for anyone reading the policy and interpreting it, whether that's staff or the public. We did remove some discretionary language at 5.3 regarding events targeting children and families, just to make that a little bit tighter and clearer to everyone. And we did maintain the approval authority with council, and consequentially, you have some amendments to the delegation bylaw in front of you tonight. And sort of since the committee of the whole, kind council member did bring to my attention that there is a typo in the policy that's attached to the report tonight, and it says consolation, but it should read consultation. Apologies for that. It will be fixed. Since the time that this did come to the committee of the whole, we also received feedback from one of the medical health officers on Vancouver Island, and that's Dr. Sandra Allison, and she's a medical health officer for the Central Island, a fairly new addition to the medical health officers here on the island. And she was kind enough to review the policy and then provide feedback. And a lot of her feedback, I think it is attached as Appendix 5 to the report tonight. It does recommend expanding the scope of the policy to further limit the availability of alcohol through zoning, business licensing, and limitations on hours of sale. Those recommendations have not been included in the policy for council's consideration tonight. That is at council's discretion. However, the direction that staff had was a pretty clear set of policy intentions. And so I'll leave that to council tonight, whether you'd like to, how you'd like to consider that type of feedback. However, I'll just note that it may take a bit more review from staff and potentially legal review to ensure that we have sufficient municipal authority to enact the recommendations that she's got in her letter. We did take into consideration several of her recommendations, including titling the policy Municipal Alcohol Policy -events, in the case that in the future we may implement future municipal alcohol policies that address other issues surrounding alcohol use in the community. And then we also added a review date of 2023, and there were a few other comments that were really helpful from Dr. Allison. Other recommendations, such as requiring serving it right or marked areas where alcohol use is permitted, are already included in the provincial licensing process and don't require reiteration in the municipal alcohol policy. So we really tried to strip anything in the policy that's already covered by another level of government or another regulatory process out of it to make it quite simple to follow for staff and the public. So tonight in your package, you have a few things to look at, a few consequential amendments because of the municipal alcohol policy. And so the first one, I believe, is the delegation of council authority bylaw, and we've crafted a simple amendment to ensure that the authority to issue special event permits for events that serve alcohol remain with council and are not delegated to the manager of public spaces, culture, and visitor initiatives, like are some special event permits. The community hall use policy is being amended just slightly, and those amendments are highlighted in your package. And they are just to ensure alignment of terms and definitions, such as private and public events, and to make it very clear the requirement for council approval for events serving alcohol at the community hall. And then there is a special event process, which I have here on the screen. I apologize for the very small font, really just to sort of reiterate to council that the process now involves a few other questions to event organizers, whether or not you are serving alcohol. And so that middle column that you see between new event and recurring events is sort of a new question that we're asking: does your event plan on serving alcohol? And that is an automatic referral to council to ensure compliance with this policy. The evaluation was a question that was raised, I believe, at the COW meeting, sort of how do we track whether this policy is having the desired effect. And although baseline measures of alcohol consumption and alcohol-related morbidity and mortality are available from CARBC, it's notably very difficult to assess the impact of a municipal alcohol policy at the local level. because we're targeting such a small amount of events in our community. And at this stage in BC, only a small number of communities have carried their map through to full implementation, and none of them have undergone an outcome evaluation. However, as I mentioned previously, we did take the recommendation from Dr. Sandra Allison to include a policy review date of 2023 so that we can ensure that it's meeting our community's needs and council's priorities at the time. Options are presented in the report. The first option is that the municipal alcohol policy events and all of the consequential amendments be adopted or read as recommended. The second option would be to direct staff to make changes to the municipal alcohol policy and consequential amendments and return to council. And then other options include requesting further consultation or analysis by staff, and staff is recommending option 1 tonight. So I'm here for questions and comments, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Elise. Any questions for Elise from council? Councillor Steer.
I guess you're surprised that I wanted to comment, Acting Mayor McMaster. First of all, I would like to thank staff and especially Elise for a policy that fully embraces the intent and direction that council gave for the creation of this municipal alcohol policy. And I recognize the amount of, I now recognize the amount of work that goes into creating a policy when directed by council to move that forward. So I very much thank you. The intent was to recognize and reduce the potential harms associated with the service of alcohol at municipal events on public properties, and you fully embraced those intents. And I also feel that it further provides a framework to look at the issues related to alcohol consumption and availability in the community, and serve as a directional guide in the decisions we sometimes have to make on this issue. I think that it also has begun to lay a very strong base for local and regional discussions, which I'm already underway with, around a very significant public and social health issue in our communities and our broader region. And in regards to the recommendations from Dr. Allison, of which I've had conversations, I believe that enacting that review policy, a review recommendation, sorry, in 2 years will provide ample opportunity for us to fully engage in this conversation. So I think the foundations have been laid, and I think we've set a community conversation in place that I believe we will be addressing this issue in the future, and that we have a strong base with this municipal alcohol policy / events to help guide us in that direction in the future. So I want to thank you once again, and I very much support, obviously, the report.
Any other comments from council? Somebody like to make a recommendation? Councillor Steer?
I'd like to go for option number 3. No, just kidding. I will read out the, so recommend that the municipal alcohol policy events attached as Appendix 1 to the report dated January 12th, 2021 be adopted.
Second that.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried.
The next recommendation, that the District of Tofino Delegation of Council Authority Amendment Bylaw number 123-04 2021 attached as Appendix 2 to the report dated January 12th, 2021 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
I'll second that again.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried.
And the last recommendation, that the community hall use policy attached as Appendix 3 to the report dated January 12, 2021 be adopted as amended.
I'll second again.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. Thank you, Elise. Moving on to item 8.6. 2021 to 23 Council Strategic Plan Draft Review. And we have a recommendation. Is there a report?
There is not a formal staff presentation on this, but just maybe for those watching, this plan, just a reminder, I guess, and a reminder for council that this plan is rooted in the what's in our integrated community sustainability plan, and what council has before it this evening is the result of an all-day workshop, some considerable consultant and staff time drafting this material, and then a presentation to council that happened on December 16th. A few minor edits have happened since December 16th, and that's the result of that results in what's presented to council this evening.
Thank you. Someone like to move the recommendation?
I'll move that the 2021 to 2023 Council Strategic Plan be adopted as presented at the January 12th, 2021 regular council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Chalmers. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? All those in favour? None opposed? Motion carried. Moving on to 8.7, the committee of the whole. First thing is to deal with the minutes from December 14th, 2020. Someone like to move receipt?
Move receipt.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. Then we have a recommendation that the funding request from WildSafe BC be referred to the 2021 budget process. Have a mover and a seconder. Oh, Elise.
If I may, thank you, Chair McMaster. In subsequent sort of follow-up discussions with Bob Hansen of WildSafe BC, he indicated to me that his intention was actually to apply through the council grant process. And so there is no need necessarily to refer this to the budget process unless council would like to use funds from a different source to look at the request from WildSafe BC. Otherwise, a motion is not really necessary other than to refer this to the grant process or to refer WildSafe BC to the grant process, but staff is already doing that. So there is no need to make a motion unless council would like to direct funds from a different source.
Council happy to see this go through the grant process? I see a lot of nodding of heads, so let's just move on. Thanks, Elise. Finally, staff be authorised to retain consultant support to develop, issue and evaluate a request for proposals for construction management contract for the Tofino wastewater treatment plant and conveyor system upgrades.
I'll move.
Any comments from staff on this? No. Councillor Anderson, did you have your hand up?
I'll move the recommendation from committee of the whole.
Moved by Councillor Anderson.
Second it.
Seconded by Councillor Chalmers. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favour? None opposed, motion carried. Thank you, and I believe now we are going in camera. Would someone like to?
Sorry,
read?
Just question period.
Mr. Chair, I'm in call question period. Yeah.
Do you have any questions, Elise, from the public?
Through the chair, there are nobody signed up for the Q&A section.
I could see that. Would someone like to move going in camera?
I'll move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant of sections 91A of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent.
Second.
All those in favour? Does anyone need a break or motion carried? Does anyone need a break or should we just carry on?
I'd like 1 minute.
I just need a 1 minute bathroom break.
Okay, 1 minute recess.